MS Thorne. Well, well, well. What have we here, Sarah? Playing nursemaid again on company time? Sarah. She's really unwell. Miss Thorne, we need to call a doctor. MS Thorne. Unwell. Or did you do something to upset her, girl? I warned you. This is your final warning. You are fired. She was just a poor cleaner, showing a moment of kindness. She had no idea the old woman held a secret that could shatter her world, or that her cruel supervisor was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. What happens when a simple act of compassion unmasks a powerful truth? The Sterling Corporation headquarters was a cathedral of ambition, all gleaming marble and silent, efficient steel. For Sarah, navigating its endless corridors with her cleaning cart, it was another world entirely. Her own was a tiny apartment, where the heating was temperamental, and dreams were usually a size too big for her budget. Still, Sarah possessed a quiet resilience, and an artist's eye for details others missed, a flicker of emotion in a passing face, the way sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the grand atrium. Her modest dream was to one day see her younger brother Tom through college, a goal that fueled her through the monotonous hours of scrubbing and polishing. On this particular Tuesday, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of the seldom-used West Wing lounge, Sarah noticed her. An elderly woman, small and frail against the imposing modern furniture, looking decidedly unwell. Sarah had seen her before, a quiet figure who sometimes sat by the large windows, but today there was a visible pallor to her skin, a slight tremor in her hands as they rested in her lap. Sarah's first instinct was to approach, but a familiar voice echoed in her mind. Ms. Thorne, her supervisor, whose pronouncements on loitering and disturbing the clientele were legendary among the cleaning staff. Stick to your mops and your schedules. Sarah, empathy doesn't pay the bills. Efficiency does. But the sight of the woman's distress, the subtle slump of her shoulders, tugged at something deeper than workplace protocol. Sarah glanced down the empty corridor. Thorne was likely patrolling the executive suites on the upper floors. Taking a quiet breath, Sarah guided her cart to a discreet corner and approached the woman. "Excuse me, Mom." Sarah's voice was soft, hesitant. "Are you feeling all right?" The elderly woman, Eleanor Sterling, looked up. Her eyes, though clouded with discomfort, held a spark of refined intelligence. "Oh, my dear," she began, her voice a little breathy. "I'm just a little light-headed, I think. Nothing to worry about." She attempted a smile, but it wavered. Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "You look quite pale, if you don't mind me saying. Can I get you a glass of water?" "Perhaps." She gave a small, slightly awkward smile. "I'm not a doctor, Ma'am, but I do have a ginger candy in my pocket. They say it's good for a bit of a wobble." A genuine, faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. The girl's sincerity was disarming. A glass of water would be lovely. "Thank you, dear." "You're very kind." As Sarah hurried to the small hidden staff kitchenette, she couldn't help but notice the fine, almost invisible silver threading in the woman's simple shawl. It wasn't ostentatious, but it spoke of a quality far removed from Sarah's own well-worn cardigan. She returned with the water, steadying Eleanor's hand as she took a sip. "Is there anyone I can call for you? Or perhaps notify someone here in the building?" Eleanor shook her head gently. No, my son. He works here, Alexander. But he's so terribly busy, always in meetings." She sighed softly. "I wouldn't want to disturb him over a little dizzy spell." She paused, then looked at Sarah with a curious, kind gaze. "And what is your name, my dear?" "It's Sarah, Ma'am Sarah," Eleanor repeated, as if tasting the sound of it. "Thank you, Sarah. It's not often one finds such unprompted kindness, As she spoke, her hand brushed against a small, antique-looking book of poetry that lay beside her, its leather cover worn smooth with age. It slipped, and Sarah quickly caught it, before it hit the floor. "Oh, clumsy me," Eleanor murmured. "The book was clearly cherished." "Not at all, Mum." "It looks like a beautiful book," Sarah said, handing it back. She noticed the delicate, almost faded gold lettering of what looked like an author's signature on the inside cover, too intricate to read quickly. A comfortable, if brief, silence settled between them. Sarah, feeling a little awkward, just standing, remembered the small pack of cookies she'd bought for her lunch break. "A minor indulgence, Mum," she said, a touch of shyness in her voice. "I know it's not much, but would you perhaps care for a cookie? Sometimes a little something sweet helps." She pulled out the packet containing 2 slightly imperfect oatmeal cookies. "This is my most luxurious lunch item for today, I must admit." She offered a wry, charming smile. Eleanor looked surprised, then deeply touched. Her own son, for all his success, rarely had time for such simple shared moments. "Why, Sarah, that's incredibly thoughtful of you." She carefully took one of the cookies. "And I do believe an oatmeal cookie might be just the thing." They sat for a few moments, a peculiar pair in the opulent, silent lounge, the elderly woman of unknown status nibbling a cookie, and the young cleaner standing respectfully by Eleanor seemed to visibly relax, a touch of colour returning to her cheeks. "These are surprisingly good," Eleanor said, her voice a little stronger. "Did you bake them?" Sarah chuckled. "Oh, heavens, no, Ma'am. My talents lie more in, well, making things shine, not bake. These are from the little bakery down the street." My one weakness, just as Eleanor was about to reply, a sharp, imperious voice cut through the quiet Sarah. "What in the blazes do you think you're doing?" Sarah froze, her heart plummeting. Ms. Thorne stood at the entrance to the lounge, hands on her hips, her face a mask of thunderous disapproval. "Ms. Thorne, I was just—" Sarah stammered, a flush rising to her cheeks. "You were just what wasting company time, harassing our visitors." Thorne's eyes, like chips of ice, flicked dismissively towards Eleanor, then back to Sarah. "Your designated cleaning area is on the 3rd floor, not playing lady-in-waiting down here." Eleanor, though still frail, tried to intervene. "Please, Supervisor," she began, her voice regaining a touch of its natural authority. "This young lady was merely assisting me. I wasn't feeling well, and she showed great kindness." Miss Thorne barely afforded Eleanor a glance. "With all due respect, Ma'am," she said, her tone anything but respectful. "Employee conduct is my purview. Sarah knows the rules." She turned her glare back to Sarah, her voice dropping to a menacing hiss. "This is your final warning. Sarah, one more infraction, one more instance of you stepping out of line, and you'll be cleaning floors somewhere else." Do I make myself clear? Sarah could only nod her throat, tight with humiliation and the unfairness of it all. She wanted to disappear. "Ms." Thorne gave a curt, satisfied nod. "Now get back to your duties. Immediately." With a final withering look, she turned on her heel and marched away, the click of her shoes echoing like hammer blows on the marble. The encounter with Miss Thorne left Sarah shaken, but not entirely deterred. The image of Mrs. Eleanor Sterling's gentle, appreciative smile was a surprisingly potent antidote to the supervisor's venom. Over the following days, Sarah found herself subtly adjusting her cleaning route, timing her presence in the West Wing lounge to moments she hoped would be quiet, both from supervisory eyes and general foot traffic. She'd bring small, almost invisible comforts. A herbal tea bag she'd tucked into her pocket, knowing the lounge only offered standard black. "It's chamomile, ma'am," she'd whisper, offering it with a quickly procured cup of hot water. My Nan always said it calms the nerves. And after some encounters around here, I think we could all use a bit of calm. Eleanor would accept these small kindnesses with a grace that made Sarah feel less like a cleaner and more like a friend. You have a wise Nan. Sarah, Eleanor chuckled one afternoon, the sound like soft wind chimes. And you, my dear, have her spirit. She sipped the tea. This is much better than the industrial strength brew they usually offer. I suspect it could strip paint. Sarah grinned. That's probably Ms. Thorne's preferred blend, ma'am, keeps her sharp. Their conversations remained light, yet threads of deeper connection wove between them. Eleanor learning of Sarah's quiet passion for sketching, a talent Sarah rarely indulged due to lack of time and materials, encouraged her art is a language the soul speaks. Sarah, don't let the noise of the world silence it. One day Sarah shyly showed Eleanor a quick charcoal sketch she'd done of a bird perched outside her apartment window, drawn on the back of a discarded order form. Eleanor's praise was genuine and insightful, making Sarah's cheeks flush with a pleasure she hadn't felt in years. Eleanor, in turn, occasionally spoke of her son, Alexander. He's a good man, you know, she'd say, a wistful look in her eyes. Driven, perhaps, too driven. My Alexander is brilliant, truly, but sometimes as unyielding as a quarterly balance sheet. She sighed a small, fond sound. He builds empires, but sometimes forgets to water the roses, if you take my meaning. Sarah, imagining some stern, mid-level executive, would nod sympathetically. It's hard when work takes over everything, Mum. My brother Tom, he gets so caught up in his studies. Sometimes he forgets to eat, if I don't remind him. Exactly, Eleanor exclaimed softly. They need gentle reminders of the softer things in life, don't they? She looked at Sarah thoughtfully. And what about your dreams, Sarah? Beyond helping your Tom, what makes your heart take flight? Sarah hesitated. Dreams felt like a luxury. Oh, I don't know, Mum. Maybe just a little quiet? A room with good light for drawing, and perhaps not having to worry if the rent will be paid on time. A shadow crossed her face, then a flicker of a very present anxiety. Her landlord had just informed all tenants of a steep rent increase effective next month. The news had landed like a lead weight in her stomach. Meanwhile, Miss Thorne's scrutiny intensified. She seemed to materialize. Whenever Sarah paused for breath, her eyes narrowed, her questions sharp. Is this corridor up to sterling standard, Sarah? I see a smudge. A distinct smudge. She'd assigned Sarah extra tasks, polishing the already gleaming banisters on the grand staircase, deep cleaning the rarely used storerooms. It felt personal. Whispers also began to circulate among the other cleaning staff, and Martha, who had a locker next to Sarah's, cornered her one evening, playing favorites with the old lady in the lounge. Are we, Sarah? She'd said, a sneer in her voice, hoping for a hefty tip or something more. She's just a kind woman who hasn't been feeling well, Martha Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice even, that's all. But Martha's words stung, planting seeds of doubt and unease. The pressure mounted. The impending rent increase, Tom's upcoming college fees, and Miss Thorne's relentless hounding created a tightening knot of stress in Sarah's chest. There were days she considered just stopping the small acts of kindness for Eleanor, retreating into the anonymity of her duties to avoid further trouble. It would be safer, easier, but then she'd see Eleanor, waiting, a hopeful look in her eyes, and the resolve would crumble. That quiet corner of the Sterling building had become an unlikely sanctuary for them both, a small bubble of warmth in a vast, impersonal space. One afternoon, Sarah found Eleanor looking particularly tired. She'd brought a small, slightly bruised apple, polished to a shine. "It's not much, Mum," she said softly, "but it's crisp." Eleanor smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sarah, you are a constant source of small, perfect joys." She took the apple. "You know my Alexander used to love these when he was a boy, before the world told him apples weren't ambitious enough." She chuckled sadly. Their quiet moment was shattered. "Well, well, well. What have we here, miss?" Thorne stood before them, arms crossed, a truly venomous smile playing on her lips. She had clearly approached silently, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. Her eyes raked over the apple in Eleanor's hand, the teacup on the side table, and Sarah's guilty flush. "So this is how you spend your highly paid hours." Sarah chit-chatting and sharing snacks. Ms. Thorne's voice was dangerously low. "I believe I made myself abundantly clear about your duties, and about distractions, Ms. Thorne." Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Sterling wasn't—" "I don't care if Mrs. Sterling was conducting a symphony orchestra in here." Thorne snapped, her gaze unwavering. "You are paid to clean. This building has standards. This company has standards, and employees who continually disregard them, who believe they are somehow special." She took a step closer, looming over Sarah. "This is your absolute, unequivocal final warning. The very next time I find you neglecting your duties for any reason, you will be escorted from this building. Permanently, no appeals, no second chances. Am I understood?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, a cold dread seeping through her. She nodded, unable to speak. Her job, her lifeline for Tom, hung by the thinnest of threads. "I said," Ms. Thorne repeated, leaning in, "aim. I understood." "Yes, Ms. Thorne," Sarah whispered, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Good Ms." Thorne cast one last contemptuous look at Eleanor, who sat pale and distressed, then turned and walked away, her posture rigid with triumph. Sarah stood frozen, the supervisor's threat echoing in the sudden oppressive silence. She felt Eleanor's gentle eyes on her. Slowly Sarah lifted her head. Fear was still there, stark and chilling, but as she met Eleanor's gaze, a gaze filled not with pity, but with a quiet, unwavering belief and a deep, unspoken anger at the injustice Sarah had endured, a tiny spark of courage, of defiance, flickered within her. Eleanor reached out a frail hand and briefly, reassuringly touched Sarah's arm. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it felt like an anchor. The weight of Ms. Thorne's final warning pressed down on Sarah like a physical burden. For days she performed her duties with a new, heightened anxiety, constantly glancing over her shoulder. Her interactions with Eleanor Sterling reduced to fleeting, sympathetic smiles when she thought no one was watching. Eleanor, too, seemed more subdued, the light in her eyes dimmed by her concern for the young cleaner who had shown her such unselfish kindness. The unspoken tension was a taut wire between them. It was a Thursday late in the afternoon. The Sterling Corporation hummed with its usual end-of-day urgency. Sarah was finishing her tasks on an upper floor, her mind replaying Miss Thorne's threat for the 100th time, when a sudden, inexplicable feeling of dread washed over her. It was a premonition, sharp and cold, that something was terribly wrong with Eleanor. Abandoning her cart, Sarah moved as quickly as she dared through the labyrinthine corridors towards the West Wing lounge. Her heart hammered against her ribs. As she neared, she heard it, a small, choked gasp. She found Eleanor slumped on the plush sofa, one hand clutching her chest, her face a deathly grey. Her eyes, usually so alert and kind, were unfocused, clouded with pain. The book of poetry Sarah had once admired lay fallen on the floor beside her, Mrs. Sterling Eleanor. Sarah cried, rushing to her side, all thoughts of Ms. Thorne and company protocol obliterated by sheer terror. She gently took Eleanor's icy hand. "What's wrong? Can you hear me?" Eleanor's lips moved, but only a faint whisper emerged. "Dizzy. Can't. Breathe." Her breath hitched shallow and ragged. Panic seized Sarah. She looked wildly around the opulent, empty lounge. No one. She fumbled for the emergency call button on the wall panel, her fingers trembling so hard she could barely press it. It seemed to ring endlessly unanswered. Where was everyone? The building, usually a hive of activity, felt eerily deserted in this forgotten corner. "Help, Sarah!" cried out her voice, thin and desperate in the vast space. "Somebody please help." Just as she was about to try and lift Eleanor herself, a figure appeared in the doorway. Not a concerned colleague, not a helpful security guard, but Ms. Thorne, her expression initially one of irritation at the sound of shouting, quickly morphing into something else as she took in the scene. "What is all this commotion, Sarah Mills?" Thorne demanded, her voice sharp, though it wavered slightly as she registered Eleanor's alarming state. "It's Mrs. Sterling. She's collapsed. We need a doctor quickly," Sarah pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something akin to concern crossed Ms. Thorne's face, but it was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating glint. Here was her opportunity, Sarah realized with a sickening lurch, to rid herself of a troublesome employee once and for all. "Collapsed, has she?" Miss Thorne said, her voice dripping with suspicion, as she slowly advanced into the room. She didn't approach. Eleanor didn't offer a word of comfort. Instead, her gaze fixed on Sarah. Or did something happen to make her collapse, Sarah? Were you perhaps bothering her again? Pestering her? What to know? Of course not. Sarah gasped, horrified by the insinuation. She was fine a moment ago, and then, "Please, Miss Thorne, we need to call an ambulance." "Oh, I'm sure you think we do," Miss Thorne sneered, her eyes narrowing. "Causing a scene, are we hoping to look like a hero? Or perhaps you did something, said something to upset her. This is a woman of delicate constitution, clearly. Perhaps your attentions were too much for her." She gestured vaguely towards Eleanor. "You've been warned," Sarah repeatedly. "And now look. A respected visitor is gravely ill under your care." "That's not true. I was trying to help her." Sarah cried, tears of frustration and terror stinging her eyes. How could anyone be so cruel, so deliberately blind? "Help her." Miss Thorne let out a short, derisive laugh. "It looks to me like you've caused nothing but trouble since this woman arrived. You're a cleaner. Sarah, not a nurse, not a confidant. You are a liability." As Ms. Thorne's voice rose, filled with venomous accusation, the grand double doors at the far end of the lounge slid open with a near-silent swoosh. Framed in the opening, silhouetted against the light from the main corridor, stood a figure, tall, impeccably dressed, radiating an aura of such palpable power and authority that the very air in the room seemed to crackle. It was as if Sarah would later recall with a strange, detached clarity one of the marble statues from the main atrium had suddenly sprung to life, imbued with the stern, unwavering gaze of an Olympian god, Alexander Sterling. His eyes, the color of glacial ice, scanned the scene in a fraction of a second. Miss Thorne poised like a striking viper. Sarah, tear-streaked and desperate, kneeling beside the sofa. And then his mother, crumpled and grey. The transformation was instantaneous. The icy composure shattered, replaced by a look of raw, unadulterated fear. "Mother." The single word was a gunshot in the tense silence. Alexander Sterling crossed the vast expanse of the lounge in 3 long, urgent strides, his previous godlike stillness utterly gone. He fell to his knees beside Eleanor, his hand going to her forehead, then her wrist. "Mother, can you hear me?" What happened? His voice, usually so calm and commanding in boardrooms and executive meetings, was now laced with a desperate urgency that Sarah had never imagined possible. Eleanor's eyelids fluttered. She saw her son, and a flicker of recognition of relief passed through her pain-filled eyes. "Alexander!" She breathed, her voice barely audible. Alexander was already pulling out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Dr. Ramsay, I need you at Sterling Tower immediately. My mother. It's an emergency." His voice was clipped, efficient, but underscored with a tremor of controlled panic. Only then, after ensuring his mother's immediate medical attention was summoned, did he seem to become fully aware of the other 2 occupants of the room. His gaze, sharp as shattered glass, fell first on Ms. Thorne, who stood frozen, her face a mask of horrified realization, her earlier bluster completely deflated. Thorne Alexander Sterling said, his voice dangerously soft, each syllable dripping with ice. "What is going on here?" "Explain now, Mrs." Thorne opened her mouth, then closed it again. Words seemed to fail her. She looked from Alexander to his mother, then to Sarah, as if seeking a scapegoat. Before Thorne could formulate a syllable, Alexander's gaze shifted to Sarah. He saw a young, terrified cleaner, her cheap uniform smudged her face, pale with shock, kneeling beside his mother. He saw the fallen book of poetry. In his mind, clouded by fear and an urgent need to understand, to assign blame for his mother's condition, a swift, cold calculation began to form. This unknown girl, with his mother. In this state, his eyes narrowed, and he bit out his voice, a low snarl that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. What have you done to my mother?" The world tilted on its axis for Sarah. One moment, she was a cleaner, invisible, performing her duties. The next, she was at the epicenter of a terrifying drama, accused by the formidable Mr. Alexander Sterling himself, his final words. "What have you done to my mother?" echoed in her ears, a damning indictment that left no room for explanation, no space for the truth. Paramedics arrived with swift, quiet efficiency, whisking Eleanor Sterling away with Alexander at her side, his face a mask of granite. Sarah was left in the suddenly cavernous lounge, the scent of antiseptic and fear mingling in the air. Ms. Thorne, after a moment of stunned silence following Alexander's departure, quickly regained a sliver of her composure, though her usual arrogance was visibly shaken. "You are suspended, pending an investigation," she'd hissed at Sarah, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't even think about leaving the city. Someone will be in touch." Sarah walked home in a daze, the vibrant city streets a blur of indifferent faces. Suspension, investigation. The words felt like shackles. Every kind act, every whispered conversation with Eleanor now seemed twisted into something sinister. In the cold light of Alexander Sterling's fury, how could he look at his mother, see her distress, and then look at her Sarah and see a villain? The injustice of it was a bitter pill choking her. She thought of Tom, of the rent, of the fragile hope that had briefly flickered within her, all extinguished. At the hospital, Alexander Sterling paced the private waiting room like a caged lion. His mother was stable. The doctors had assured him a severe episode of angina, likely exacerbated by stress. Stress. The word gnawed at him. What stress? Who had caused it? His mind kept replaying the scene in the lounge, Thorne's venomous accusations, the young cleaner's terrified face, his mother's evident frailty. When Eleanor was finally settled in a private suite, lucid and resting, Alexander sat by her bedside, his anger simmering just beneath a veneer of calm mother. He began, his voice gentle but firm. "You must tell me exactly what happened. That girl, that cleaner." Eleanor turned her head slowly. Her eyes, though tired, were clear and held a familiar, unwavering resolve. "Alexander," she said, her voice weak but steady, "that cleaner, as you call her, is named Sarah. And she is the reason, I suspect, that a severe episode wasn't something far worse." Alexander frowned, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "For weeks now," dear Eleanor continued, "that young woman has shown me nothing but kindness, unsolicited, unexpected kindness. When I felt unwell, she was there. She brought me tea, a warm shawl when I was cold, even shared her own small lunch with me once. A faint smile touched her lips. She even tried to make me laugh by telling me how clumsy her neighbor's cat was, always getting into silly predicaments. I haven't laughed like that so freely in a long time." Alexander listened, a knot of unease tightening in his chest. This was not the narrative he had constructed. She knew I was just an old woman resting in a lounge. Eleanor said, her gaze direct. She had no idea who I was. She expected nothing. She simply cared. And that Ms. Thorne, Alexander, that woman was abominably cruel to Sarah repeatedly. Today, when I felt so ill, Sarah was desperate to help me. Thorne accused her of the most dreadful things. Eleanor's voice trembled with remembered indignation. Sarah was trying to protect me, to comfort me, even as that harpy was threatening her job. Alexander remained silent, processing his mother's words. He trusted Eleanor's judgment implicitly. She was no fool. She could see artifice a mile away. He thought of Sarah's wide, terrified eyes. Had he misread fear as guilt? She even showed me some of her sketches. Eleanor added softly, "She has a true artist's soul, trapped in a life of drudgery. She dreams of helping her brother through college. That's where her heart is." Alexander, not in scheming or causing harm. The image of the powerful CEO, the Olympian god from the lounge, began to crack. Alexander remembered the small, worn book of poetry by his mother's side, a book he himself had given her years ago. He remembered the look on Sarah's face, not cunning, but genuinely panicked. He had seen countless people try to ingratiate themselves with him, with his family. Their insincerity was usually a stench he could detect instantly. Sarah had smelled only of fear, and if he was honest with himself, a kind of bewildered innocence. Later that evening, after ensuring his mother was comfortable and had everything she needed, Alexander returned to his own starkly minimalist penthouse. He called his head of security. "Mark," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "that incident in the West Wing lounge today. With my mother and a cleaner named Sarah and a supervisor, Thorne, I want a full discreet report on my desk by morning CCTV footage, personnel files, any prior complaints or commendations regarding both employees, everything." As he waited, the image of Sarah's face, pale and tear-streaked, kept intruding on his thoughts. He had built his empire on decisive action, on unwavering self-belief. But what if this time his decisiveness had been a mistake? What if his anger, fueled by fear for his mother, had blinded him to the truth? It was a deeply uncomfortable thought. The following morning, the report lay on his desk. He read it slowly, meticulously. Sarah's employment record, spotless if unremarkable. Notes from other staff often mentioned her quiet diligence, Morsosis. Thorne's file, several commendations for efficiency, but also a few hushed informal complaints about her abrasive management style, quickly dismissed by her superiors. The CCTV footage was grainy without audio, but it showed Sarah's gentle interactions with his mother over several days. It showed Miss Thorne's aggressive posturing, and it showed Sarah's desperate attempts to aid his mother during her collapse, just before Thorne's intervention. Just as he finished reading Simses, Thorne herself was announced by his assistant. She entered his office oozing a false sympathy, her face arranged in lines of concern. "Mr. Sterling, I am so dreadfully sorry about your mother's ordeal, and about that unfortunate girl. I had my suspicions about her, for weeks, trying to insinuate herself." Alexander held up a hand, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Thorne," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "your concern is noted." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "My mother has given me her full account of events. I also have a rather comprehensive security report." He tapped the folder on his desk. "There are a few discrepancies." Ms. Thorne's practiced smile faltered. A flicker of panic appeared in her eyes. Alexander watched her for a moment longer, then said to his intercom, "Ms. Davies, please locate Sarah. I believe her surname is Miller from the file, and ask her to come to my office. Tell her it's regarding her employment." He looked back at Ms. Thorne, whose face had paled considerably. "Perhaps we can clear up these discrepancies together." Sarah, when she received the call, felt her blood run cold. This was it, the final blow. She walked towards Alexander Sterling's office on the top floor, a realm she had only ever cleaned, never entered as a person, with the heavy dread of someone walking to their own execution. Her heart hammered each beat, a countdown to her dismissal. She clutched her worn bag, her knuckles white, and prayed for a strength she didn't feel as Sarah entered Alexander Sterling's office, a vast expanse of minimalist elegance that seemed to absorb all sound, all hope. Miss Thorne was already present, perched, burenhage, uneasily on the edge of a leather chair, her usual hauteur replaced by a sickly pallor. Alexander Sterling sat behind a large, imposing desk, his expression unreadable, though the storm in his eyes from the previous day seemed to have subsided, replaced by a deep, thoughtful calm. "Miss Sarah Miller," he began, his voice. "Even please take a seat." He gestured to a chair, not unkindly. "As I mentioned, my mother has given me her account of recent events. I have also reviewed security logs and personnel reports. Now, I would like to hear your version from the beginning." Sarah, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, took a shaky breath. Fear still gnawed at her, but looking at Mr. Sterling's surprisingly patient gaze, a sliver of courage returned. She recounted everything, her voice low but clear. She spoke of her initial concern for Mrs. Sterling, their quiet conversations, the small comforts she tried to offer. She described Miss Thorne's escalating hostility and her own fear for her job. When she reached the part about Eleanor's collapse, her voice faltered her concern for the elderly woman, still overriding her own predicament. "I was so scared for her, sir. She just seemed so fragile." She didn't embellish, didn't cast blame beyond the simple facts, didn't plead for her job. She simply told her truth. As Sarah finished, a profound silence filled the room. Alexander Sterling looked from Sarah's earnest, tear-bright eyes to Miss Thorne's increasingly agitated demeanor. Thorne Alexander said, his voice now edged with a cold disappointment that was more cutting than any overt anger. "Your actions, as reported by my mother, by Miss Miller, and corroborated by security evidence, demonstrate a gross abuse of your authority, a shocking lack of compassion, and frankly, a level of dishonesty that this corporation will not tolerate." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Your employment with Sterling Corporation is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Miss Thorne gasped, her face contorting. "Mr. Sterling, you can't. I've given years to this company. That girl is lying. She's manipulative." "Enough, Miss Thorne." Alexander cut her off, his voice firm. "The evidence is irrefutable. Your attempts to further slander Miss Miller only confirm my decision." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Security to my office, please." The following moments were a blur for Sarah as Miss Thorne was escorted out, protesting incoherently. When the door closed, leaving Sarah alone with the CEO, she braced herself, unsure what to expect. Alexander Sterling rose from his desk and walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. The formality was still there, but the icy wall around him had undeniably thawed. "Miss Miller, Sarah," he said, and the use of her first name surprised her. "On behalf of myself and my mother, I offer you our sincerest, deepest apologies." Sarah stared at him, stunned. "An apology from the Alexander Sterling. My initial reaction," he continued, a hint of regret in his voice, "was driven by fear for my mother. I was rash, and I misjudged you terribly. What you showed my mother was a level of kindness and integrity that is rare and precious. You did so with no expectation of reward, under considerable personal risk." He met her gaze directly. "That kind of character is not something I or this company can afford to lose." He then explained that his mother, Eleanor, was recovering well at home, already asking when she could see Sarah again. A warm feeling spread through Sarah, a relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. "My mother and I would like to show our gratitude in a more tangible way," Alexander said, "beyond a simple bonus, which you will of course receive." He anticipated her quiet pride. "This isn't about charity, Sarah. This is about recognizing value. My mother has become very fond of you. She requires a personal assistant, someone to help manage her appointments, accompany her on outings, and generally provide companionship. Someone with patience, kindness, and discretion." He smiled faintly. "She specifically asked if you might consider the position. The salary and benefits would of course be commensurate with such a role." Sarah was speechless. From cleaner to personal assistant, to Mrs. Eleanor Sterling. It was more than she could have ever imagined. Or Alexander continued, "If that's not to your preference, there are other opportunities within the Sterling Foundation, our philanthropic arm. We support educational initiatives. Your desire to help your brother. We could help with that. And perhaps with that art talent. My mother tells me you possess." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but this time they were tears of disbelief, of overwhelming gratitude, "Sir." "Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say." Eleanor Sterling, who had quietly entered the office a few moments earlier, leaning lightly on a cane, but her eyes bright, now spoke. "You can say yes, my dear Sarah." She smiled warmly. "And perhaps you can start by telling me if those ginger candies of yours are a patented secret, or if you'd be willing to share your supplier." Alexander chuckled, a genuine relaxed sound that Sarah had never expected to hear from him. "Mother, I believe you're already negotiating perks." Sarah laughed through her tears. Yes, I would be honored. Mrs. Sterling and Mr. Sterling, thank you for believing me." In the months that followed, Sarah's life transformed. She became Eleanor's trusted companion and assistant. Her days were filled not with scrubbing floors, but with organizing charity events, discussing art and poetry, and ensuring Eleanor's comfort and happiness. The Sterling Corporation, through its foundation, provided a scholarship for Tom and Sarah, enrolled in an evening art class, her sketches slowly filling notebooks with newfound confidence. She never lost her humility, her innate kindness, or the memory of her struggles. It kept her grounded, her empathy, a quiet strength that endeared her further to Eleanor, and even earned her the grudging, then genuine respect of Alexander. He found himself often seeking her straightforward, unvarnished perspective, a refreshing antidote to the sycophancy he often encountered. Sarah learned that true wealth wasn't about marble halls or stock portfolios, but about human connection, about kindness given freely, and about the courage to see beyond appearances. She had stepped into the Sterling Tower as a cleaner, an invisible girl with a weary heart. She now walked its corridors with a quiet dignity, a valued member of a world she had once only dreamed of, not because of luck, but because of a simple, unwavering act of compassion, a shared cookie, a moment of care that had quite unexpectedly changed everything. And in the warm glow of Eleanor's friendship and Alexander's newfound respect, Sarah knew she had finally found her place, a place where her kindness was not just seen, but truly celebrated. And so Sarah's journey reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can echo in the grandest of halls, changing not just one life, but the hearts of those who witness it. How often do we walk past the quiet heroes in our own lives, the ones offering warmth with no expectation of reward? Perhaps true wealth isn't measured in what we accumulate, but in the compassion we choose to share. This story, like so many threads in the vast tapestry of life, speaks to the unexpected connections that can bloom in the most unlikely of places. It leaves us wondering, what ripples are your own acts of kindness creating in the world today? The journey of Sarah, Eleanor, and Alexander has truly resonated with us, and we hope it has touched you too. If their story sparked a thought, a feeling, or even a memory for you, we'd love to hear about it. What part of Sarah's story moved you the most? Was it her unwavering kindness despite her struggles, or perhaps Mr. Sterling's courage to admit his mistake and seek true justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We believe every perspective enriches the narrative, and because we are always striving to bring you stories that inspire and engage, your feedback is incredibly valuable. If you have any ideas on how we can make our future stories even more compelling, or if there's anything in today's storytelling you'd like us to improve, please don't hesitate to let us know in the comments. Your insights are what help us grow and perfect our craft each day. If this story warmed your heart, please give it a like. And if you feel its message of kindness and understanding could resonate with someone else, we'd be so grateful if you'd share it. To continue exploring more tales of compassion, resilience, and the surprising turns of life, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more journeys like Sarah's waiting to be discovered together with you. Thank you for being with us today, for listening, and for being a part of our community. Until next time, may your own story be filled with unexpected kindness and beautiful connections.